Now it's my pleasure to introduce Terhi Lehtonen. She is the State Secretary for the Environment and Climate Change, Government of Finland, and she is going to share with us the view from the Government of Finland. Terhi?
Thank you, and good morning to you all, and thank you for the invitation, and congratulations to the organizers for bringing together cities, tech companies, and startups with policymakers and at EU and national level for this very timely discussion. We need to accelerate the green transition of our economies from bottom up as well as from top down. And to do so, we need to engage across sector silos on all levels of government. Friends and colleagues, we must not lose sight of the big picture. Climate change is still spinning out of control. We're not on track to limit temperature rise to 1.5 degrees, and our climate system seems to be reacting to the greenhouse gas concentrations more aggressively than what we hoped. The available carbon budget window is closing, even for those emission scenarios that would achieve 1.5 degrees with an initial overshoot. Now, the Russian war of aggression in Ukraine and the energy crisis in its wake has not made this task easier. Tackling climate change requires transformational change from all major emitters, and geopolitical tensions may make achieving the necessary energy transition more difficult. In the short term, due to halting Russian supplies, energy markets in Europe may need to resort to even more greenhouse gas intensive fuels to ensure security of peak supply. Ministers and member states' heads of government have scrambled to secure new suppliers for fossil fuels. And this has unfortunately created some doubts in some of our partner countries across the world regarding our commitment to climate action. It is therefore of utmost importance that we are able to dispel such doubts in the upcoming COP27 meeting in Egypt less than a fortnight from now, and demonstrate that the war effort and the energy crisis caused by the Russian war in Ukraine is not affecting our commitment to achieve at least 55% greenhouse gas emission reductions by 2030. The good news is that the co-legislators are making steady progress to conclude the necessary legislation to deliver on that commitment. In fact, our legislative framework looks set to deliver more than 55% reductions. So climate action has not been put on the back burner in the EU. In Finland, we are not giving up on our target, which is now binding in law, to be climate neutral by 2035 and carbon negative soon after that. In fact, 60% of our population live in cities that aim to achieve that climate neutrality already by 2030. The real solution is simply to break away from the use of fossil energy as quickly as possible. And we should use the energy crisis to achieve net zero in Europe early. And to do so, we need European tech. We need innovations, solutions, and we need deployment. We need more installed solar, wind power generation, more heat pumps, more smart energy storage, and solutions for flexible energy demand. In Finland, we made the decision to dedicate at least half of the RRF, the European COVID recovery funding, to direct climate action. And that choice bears fruit now. We are supporting innovative energy solutions, electrification, and decarbonation in industry, power to X solutions, investments in circular economy, and so forth. In addition, large share of the remaining funding will be dedicated to investment into digitalization, which will, in many cases, also benefit the climate. The government has increased support for buildings and households to move away from oil and gas heating and energy renovations in general. The government is also introducing a green transition loan guarantee for households and small businesses, with also EU support included. All of this means more and better technology. To the businesses here, I would ask, do we have the production lines available to deliver all the solar panels and heat pumps for Europe? Do we have the entrepreneurs to install and refurbish our homes? And if not, what can be done to address these bottlenecks? And to the energy companies and cities, I would ask, have we deployed all smart solutions to increase energy efficiency and flexibility of our energy systems? In the Finnish city of Tampere, the local district heating company has recently installed a new electric boiler to supply heat when electricity price is low, to store the heat in the network, allowing to save on combusted fuels. That might seem odd at a time when electricity prices have risen to eye-watering heights, but in reality, even now, the spot market prices still regularly drop to very low, sometimes close to zero. So this way, and the combustible fuels are expensive. So this crisis and tech is helping us. Another clever use of tech I read about just yesterday is the decision of the largest electric vehicle charging infrastructure provider in Finland, Virta, to install technology in their chargers for them to automatically switch off for a few seconds or maximum couple of minutes when the frequency in the electricity grid drops in the system, allowing then the grid operator to adjust with frequency containment reserve. This type of stabilization service will be very important when the share of renewable, the variable power supply increase. In this case, this stabilization service will be provided to the grid for free, without any noticeable disadvantage to the consumer, but it will benefit all users of the grid and us all. Friends, COP27 will very much be an African COP and given the experienced impact and lack of certainty of achieving the temperature goals, the agenda will undoubtedly have a strong focus on adaptation. While achieving the 1.5 degrees objective, or limiting the warming to 1.5 degrees, will be of essence to be able to keep the needs for adaptation and loss and damage more manageable, the world will also need tech for adaptation and increasing our resilience. Weather technology, forecasting, new technology to deal with extreme events, aside the nature-based solutions that Commissioner was mentioning. Mobilizing finance for the green transition, including the energy transition, and improving resilience to be able to adapt to the unavoidable climate change is key for all governments grappling with energy crisis, but finance will also be a central theme of the COP. Now, delivering on our commitments on international finance in general and adaptation in particular is a must. Still, in the big picture, it is fundamental that we get cracking on fully implementing the Paris Agreement commitment to align all financial flows with our climate goals. All finance and investment should be consistent with Paris Agreement path. And this applies also to tech. It is important that the digitalization and technology are harnessed to advance and accelerate transition to a climate neutral circular economy, like the Commissioner already noted, that they truly are part of the solution and not part of the problem or the part of an old economic model. With this, I wish you a very fruitful day working for a better future that we need. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to stay there. We're going to open it up for questions. So she has kindly she will be staying for questions, and so if any of you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Will we have a mic that will go around? Okay, so Simon's got a mic. But before we take any questions, I'm so glad I lived in Silicon Valley for 17 years. When I first moved to Silicon Valley, one of the first things that I learned is that mistakes and failures are good as long as you can learn from them and get better. So as you were talking about COP27, I realized that I made a mathematical error in my opening remark this morning. I said that the year 2030 will be COP34. And as you were talking about COP27, I was like, okay, wait a second. No, that's 7 years from this year. Next year, so 2030 COP will be COP35. So I will Silicon Valley style, technology style, admit my mistake, but I'm going to improve on it and declare that 2030 will all be gathered perhaps at the Swan and Dog in COP35. So thank you for helping me recognize that. Okay, so Are there any questions in the audience?
Good morning, Terhi. Good morning, all of you. My name is Maxime Bureau. I work for 3M, so we do post-it notes, but we do also tech for climate. So, question, I think we are all here, so we are very supportive of, Terhi, what you said, what the commissioner said, and we'll be at the COP. We are all convinced. Now, sometimes, we have the feeling that the regulatory framework in town, we have the Green Deal. We all agree with the objectives, but we see a lot of legislation on the table, and we see sometimes some inconsistencies between them and, as you mentioned, and the Commission mentioned, strategic autonomy or strategic value chains. For example, we see that we want maybe to ban some, I will say, specialty materials which are necessary for semiconductor or others. So what do you think about maybe of all this legislation? How can we ensure that we have a regulatory framework which really supports innovation, and so we can help you achieve the goals of Paris? Thank you.
Thank you, Maxime, for the question, and thank you for your engagement in the Green Deal and in this transition at the European and European level. I think it is a difficult juggle, and I can understand the businesses that we need. World is very complicated, and for example, our environment is also very polluted, and some of the materials that we have developed are dangerous to our environment and to ourselves, and so we need to be able to contain all the risk and negative impact. So sometimes it must appear like we're doing it's becoming a very complicated network, but I think this is where we need the innovation. So somehow I think we should use also the European market power, that we set the standards that are good for the environment and our health, and then ensure a fair competition within that market, so that we can spur the best technologies and the cleanest solutions here. And so I just trust that you will be engaging in that process as we go along to point those possible inconsistencies that the European Commission and the member states might have. So I think this is where we need the stakeholder participation and the transparency and the exchanges.
Any other? Yep.
I'm very impressed to learn that you have this binding target of carbon neutrality by 2035. That's 15 years before the rest of the EU. Can you elaborate a little bit on how you plan to reach that? Are you still on track despite the energy crisis and economic situation? Are you going to rely on compensating emissions, carbon capture, etc.?
Thank you. That's a good question. I think probably the energy crisis is actually making this transition faster. So it's in our ETS sector, so the big emitters that are under the European Emissions Trading Scheme, the development seems to be going as planned, and in principle potentially even faster. As we have been analyzing this during the last 3 years as a government, the reality has moved faster. The plans of companies have moved faster. So I'm confident that on the emission side, when it comes to the big emitters and businesses, we're good. And energy sector, we're good and well on track. We have difficulties in the effort sharing side. So when it comes to transport emissions, agriculture emissions, and some of the small businesses and that sector. But we have looked at in detail and tedious discussions with all of the ministries. We have found the measures that which we will be able to reduce the emissions to fulfill also the EU binding targets for effort sharing, which is 50% for us for those sectors by 2030 compared to 2005. That's very tight, but it's consistent with our path to climate neutrality. And then we're counting on our land sector sink, the forest sink, to be at the level of 21 million ton around in 2035, to absorb the remaining emissions. Now, our big difficulty will be the land sector sink. We had some very alarming news last year that our forest sink has reduced significantly. So that this is something that our government is looking into, analyzing what are the reasons and what could be the means to tackle it, and it will be up to the next government to set in place policies to make sure. But there's many things that we can do. That we have a lot of peat lands that are having high emissions in the land sector. We have peat agricultural land, we have peat forest that where we can move to better practices, and then it's an issue also of harvest levels and where the harvests are happening. But so that target is now set in law, in binding law. So and there is an obligation for governments to make the necessary planning to be on track.
Any other questions for State Secretary Lehtonen?
Thank you very much. You mentioned skills at a certain moment, saying that it's nice to have the technology, but not if you're missing the skills. And do you do anything special in Finland to overcome these skills in tech or skills related also to climate? Thank you.
We try to. There's also when we started with the climate neutrality 2035, we also invited the big sectors, the industry sectors and sectors of economy to make their own climate neutrality roadmaps, and we invited 7 sectors. We had 13 that engaged, and also actually the labor unions engaged with us and said, look, you have to look at the skills needed for these scenarios or these roadmaps to be a reality, that this requires also work. And same with our just transition plans. We have been alerted that we need them. And so there has been work to look into where we have bottlenecks, and we have also invested more in education and in new starting places for universities and for sort of technology schools. But I think it's a big issue, honestly. I think that we have shortage, and it's probably an issue for all of Europe.
I have one question for you, actually, if you don't mind, State Secretary. So when I was working for Accenture in the early 2000s, we were all in awe of a company called Nokia. And so Nokia was a trailblazer in mobile technologies. I'd be curious to hear today, whilst Nokia is very much a fundamental part of digital transformation, what kinds of technologies do you see in Finland emerging, whether that's in the startup community or in the larger technology enterprises, that are notable to you in the role of climate and sustainability?
Well, I think I'm probably not the best expert. I'm not. I don't have such a deep understanding of technology. But what I'm impressed in we have regional hubs in, for example, in Oulu, where also Nokia has been active, and we have companies dealing with smart devices, following our bodily functions, and Polar and others, and Suunto and others, but also mobile, so going to not 5G but 6 and beyond, and I think that's it. And then artificial intelligence, and also the big supercomputers that I think we have one of the biggest one now starting functioning somewhere in north of Finland, and that installation has been very much in a sort of taking into consideration the green transition and neutralizing climate impact. And I think and the idea is also to use that computing power for tackling our challenges as a society on green transition.
100%. Okay, any more questions for State Secretary Lehtonen? No? Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate that, Terhi.